And then types of gender blind spots. This is where it's good that we have wine tonight, because this is where you might need it. I talk about common gender biases. These are both external and internal biases, so things that we have that stop us from doing things or stop us from developing career skills or being the best we can be. And so it really is both external and internal. And these are both for men and women. I talk about some of the male gender blind spots that inhibit them as well, and I'll talk about them later in the presentation. So common gender biases, very important to recognize in real time. Self-limiting mindsets, I give quite a few examples of it. In terms of leadership, you have to see it to be it, which is a phrase that it was in a Time magazine, that it images of 46 firsts in terms of women who are firsts. We have to see it to be it. Otherwise, we don't think we're leaders. Otherwise, we don't think that we can promote. So these are things that hold us back. Gender habits and rituals, these happened under stress. These are things we learn in childhood, and we don't know why we do them. And it's fine if you do them with your same cultural group, but oftentimes we do them without recognizing it. And I'll give some examples of that. And the major issue with that is they're being misread through masculine lenses. And most of these habits that are feminine rituals tend to be misinterpreted as a lack of confidence. They have nothing to do with confidence, but that's how they're interpreted. So it's really important to be aware of what might be misread. Gendered expectations, this is a large area, especially with regard to negotiation. Being aware of what other people expect of you, and then getting pushback when perhaps you're not conforming to their expectations. And then the final one is where performance suffers because we're afraid of confirming a negative stereotype. And frankly, in all my readings, this is the one that is most insidious and I think really the most dangerous, and it's really important to be aware of it. So those are the 6 types of gender blind spots that I discuss in the book with regard to skill development. And now I'm going to go into detail in terms of the gender blind spots. The first one is common gender biases. There's a whole bunch of them in the chapter Expose. These are just some of them: maternal wall, tightrope, prove it again, double standard, etc. A couple of months ago, the Ministry of Environment called the Minister of Environment, a member of Parliament rather, called the Ministry of Environment Climate Barbie. You're all aware of that event? That was overt, and it really, when you hear that, you sort of laugh at it and laugh at the person doing it, right? Subtle is much more damaging. Those ones where you're not quite sure it's a gender bias. I've got a blog on my website about this. So the negative consequences are much stronger with subtle than overt. So subtle can include less informal feedback, being interrupted, not being invited to important meetings, left out of the information loop, or a lack of support from your boss. These are all subtle types of gender biases. And mansplaining, we've all heard about it and it was all very funny, right? It turns out that it's not a joke, that it costs, they've estimated, $200 billion a year in the US for mansplaining. That's the cost in wasted time. And microaggressions, I know, I thought I couldn't believe it either. Microaggressions, those are small, subtle, negative messages that appear not to be intended, and they might not be, they may be unconscious, but they still make you feel like another. So you're just like one of the guys. So initially you feel really good to hear that, but then you realize, oh, I'm not one of the guys. I'm a woman. And so I'm not really in the club, even though they're telling me that, I am just like them. So that's a microaggression, and they can almost feel like you're being gaslighted, these types of things, because you have to sort of assess them. Is it me? Is it the comment? So those are particularly damaging, those subtle gender biases. In the material, I talk about techniques. In the chapter Expose, I provide multiple techniques, including counter tactics from competitive negotiation. So name, correct, and question. Here's an example. You're using a double standard. Everyone is direct, but you are calling me aggressive. Why is that? And again, you want to do it in a very equal tone, but you want to deal with it typically, something like that. Building alliances, very important to do. Use humor if you can. It's the best thing. However, it can be difficult. One woman in an early session said that her line was, do we have to call the diversity police when anyone said something that wasn't appropriate? So that's using humor. So really important to find a technique that you're comfortable with the circumstance. Leadership is one where there are a lot of gender biases involved. The stereotype is still masculine, command and control, even though that's the worst method, the least effective. And the most effective methods or styles are feminine approaches. And again, with leadership, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And that's in the latest Time magazine. So it's really important that we are able to see that we are leaders, because it's also a self-limiting mindset as well if we don't think we're leaders. And evolving gender roles to get past it with leadership. So the other week I was giving a seminar, and one of the women, female partners, was telling me about her daughter. So when she was a child, this female partner, she was always told not to be bossy. Don't be bossy. And so she decided she was going to tell her daughter to respond to that when she got it, because her daughter was very similar to her, to say, great, thank you. I am a great leader, aren't I? And so I had to laugh at that. And she told me the story where it turned out it was her mother who came over, and her daughter came to her and explained that Nana had said to her, quit being bossy. Don't be bossy. And she said, thanks, Nana. I am a great leader. And so that's evolving gender rules. That's bias busting. That's getting rid of that gender bias. Self-limiting beliefs. This is another gender blind spot. If you can't see it, you can't leave it. If you don't recognize how you're limiting yourself, then you won't be able to reduce it. And the skill of self-promotion is most impacted with this. I've mentioned that a lot of women promote with their foot on the brake, and it's very uncomfortable because of this self-limiting belief. Also, I'm not a leader. Even when people offer you leadership positions, you may not take it because you don't feel like a leader. In the book, I talk about drop the ball, home control disease, where you feel you have to do everything at home. That can be a self-limiting belief as well, that no one else can do it, that you do it best. So Drop the Ball is a book where the author talks about negotiating and delegating with joy, how she worked it out, and about the self-limiting belief involved in that. Another self-limiting belief for a lot of women is that everything is a meritocracy, that if I work hard enough, then I will get ahead, I will advance. And it's really important to become socially intelligent. So reading the chapter on politics, understanding how things work. So as I mentioned, promotion is one of the ones that tends to really get hindered because of self-limiting beliefs. We feel braggy. It just feels uncomfortable. It doesn't feel right. We trouble share instead of promoting. So we go back to the office and there may be one question in a discovery that we didn't do right. And we will tell people about that one question. There could be 250 questions that we did brilliantly and it worked well, but we will come back and talk about the one. So it's really important to be aware of trouble sharing does tend to be a feminine ritual. We have to be careful about what we're doing and how people may perceive us because of these habits, these gender habits. Talking about others instead of ourselves. I've had clients who said, oh, I self-promote, so I asked them for an example. And they gave me an example of talking to the CEO about the team. I said, oh, so did you talk about what you do? Well, no, just about the team. You can see the light bulb going off. Well, that's right, I didn't talk about myself. Or a client not being able to talk at all about herself in an interview when asked, so tell us about yourself. She was basically, it's all in the resume, and the blinding insight that occurred with coaching. Working hard and ensuring the work is perfect. That is also something that we think will promote us, and work will speak for itself. So that's a myth. That is a myth that I get into, and a lot of women believe it because of the meritocracy idea. So important to be aware of that self-limiting belief. So if you can learn the belief, you can relearn it. Recognize the foot on the brake. Recognize the beliefs that are holding you back. Promote others, but ensure you also promote yourself. Be connective, but show your value. Be connective and show your competence. Or disrupt. Just ignore the stereotypes. Do what you want to do. And don't care. Gender habits that get in the way. So underlying all of these gender habits are the values that we learn as girls and boys. So girls learn that power is equal and shared. So a lot of our rituals are about that there is a ritual. We may not truly believe that we're all equal, but there is a ritual, and our behaviors follow from that, that power is called dead even and is shared. Boys learn that power is hierarchical. That means that you're always one up and one down in their world. They're always looking to assess who's one up and who's one down. Girls are taught to value relationships because of the power sharing, and boys are taught that achievement and success are important. And these bleed into every type of, or inform every type of career skill. Communication is a key one with regard to this. So men, they use communication to determine and achieve power and status. Women use it to determine and achieve connection. Deborah Tannen, an expert on communication, talks about cross-cultural communication between men and women. It's actually talking at cross purposes, and we don't recognize it. I attended a session and a PhD was talking. It was really interesting. I thought she had a lot of really great information. And she even talked about women's tentative communication styles. In each slide, she said, okay. It was sometimes embedded, sometimes at the end of the slide. And she used upspeak. So it sounded as if she was using a question instead of a statement each time. I asked for feedback because I give an example in my book about this. A client came to me and said that she had done this in a presentation. And so I was fascinated to see what other people thought of the presentation. And the feedback was not good about the woman. There was a man that preceded her, a professor who talked, and then she talked. And I found it fascinating because everybody I talked to thought that her presentation wasn't very good. So recognize the habit and decrease its use if you do have a tentative language style. The misinterpretation of gender habits, as I've mentioned, most of them are misread as a lack of confidence, and it has nothing to do with confidence. Competence, abilities, or skills. Impression management is really, really important, and it's important for everybody. As you get up in organizations, being able to be aware of your brand and what other people think of you, that's the basis of the 360 evaluations that go on. So you want to make your value visible, and I find it ironic that some savvy male executives are now telling my coaching clients this, to make their value visible, to get out of their office, to promote themselves. So it's actually getting out there in terms of this misrepresentation or misreading. Presence and engagement, it's very easy to tweak this, use expansive postures. Professor Cuddy has talked about this. She looked at MBA women who engaged less in class and looked at expansive postures to expand participation. It now appears that it also may be involved in gendered expectations as well, their lack of engagement or their less engagement. Gendered expectations have a huge effect on us. We're social animals. So huge effect both on males and females. So men not asking for directions, they estimate costs about $3,400 over a lifetime. Men not asking for directions because they'll be one down to the person, the stranger they're never going to see again. They're going to be one down in status. And women not asking costs about $1 million to $1.5 million over a lifetime career. So it costs us more in terms of our gendered expectations, unfortunately. NBA players, there's only one player that uses a foul shot that's the most effective. It's called the granny shot. Any idea why they might not use it due to gendered expectations? You're absolutely right. So this is the one that everybody uses, not as effective. This is the one that none of the males will use. And I give an example of a famous basketball player who tried it for one game and then quit because he felt like a sissy. So gendered expectations affect all of us. And Harvard MBA females not participating in class, survey data, they came in all equal in terms of their academic credentials. They did not do as well, generally, and they also participated less in class. And it was because of not wanting to violate gender expectations about being assertive as women, about arguing in class as women, about standing out as women. This is at Harvard at the MBA program. Negotiation, gendered expectations are huge here. Women who ask are pushy, we get that, we intuit that, and so we don't do it. Also accommodation, as I've mentioned, men and women push harder against women. We are great negotiators. We negotiate wonderfully for others. Gender situational triggers are due to gender training. So what they find is specific outcome, different sex differences in gendered outcome due to our gender training. So there's differences in how male and female negotiate in different situations and also the result they get. It can be reduced or eliminated when the trigger is revealed. Again, awareness is key. Women ask and negotiate when it's clear they can. So once they know there's an expectation for them to negotiate, they do very well. And there's no gender difference. Negative stereotype threat. So this is where performance suffers because the person fears they're going to confirm a negative stereotype. And the research involved in this is priming gender identity in participants before the tasks. So they will have you fill in a form that indicates gender. It can be as simple as that. And the performance is reduced by the group assumed to do poorly. So verbal skills for males are affected, and math and science skills for females. I have got this in bold for a specific reason. There are no cognitive sex differences in reality. And I always get pushback in seminars about this. And this is what I did my graduate research in as a neuropsychologist. Sex differences in the brain and cognitive differences. There are none. They've now been able to put together tons of small studies, small n's, looked at the data, and there are no cognitive differences. So if you leave tonight remembering nothing else, remember this: there are no cognitive sex differences. They are now saying cognitive sex differences, when they exist, are due to this negative stereotype threat. You think you're not going to do well, you don't do well. Subtle priming more powerful than obvious. So if you walk in to a boardroom and you're the only female, which is quite common, this can start happening. And people always ask me about the imposter syndrome, and I think this explains it very well, where you feel you're a fraud, where all of these self-doubts start coming up because you're being primed with this threat. So it's very important to recognize when it's happening, where it can occur, and start identifying with a higher status group. Cancels it out. You're not vulnerable to the threat. You're not going to start feeling fearful and reduce your cognitive performance. So start recognizing your degrees. Start recognizing where you work, how great it is, how that is higher status. So recognize before the threat is triggered. So here are my asks. Women Don't Ask. That was a book from 2003. Here are my asks. Please read my blogs. I blog extensively, usually around 2 a week. So if you're interested, please go and look at them. Join me on LinkedIn and I'll give you notice about my book release date. It's just on the cusp of being released. And please buy my book and tell your friends if you enjoy it. Tell your friends about it. Also, half the proceeds are going to Because I Am a Girl. We have to stop the practice of child brides. And in your buying the book, you are also supporting Because I Am a Girl. And that's it. Thank you.